So hello, I'm Eddie from Kippo Models, and today what I would like to show you is how to assemble the shell of the Mark1 coach kit. This is a resin kit, and it requires some sanding and a jig to assemble the coach. So the first thing you need to do is make a jig. I mean, you can do this without a jig, but I just find it a lot easier. And the idea of the jig is so that you can put the underframes on there, and it's a nice flat surface, because on the bottom of the underframe you've got bits sticking up. So if you turn the frame over with the floor on it, you're not going to get it nice and flat by sitting it on the workbench. When you look at the ends of the underframe, you can see there's a lip here, and this lip is where the floor sticks out. So what you want is the underframe to fit in there like a lid, like that. So it's just two bits of wood screwed down to a nice big piece of wood I got from IKEA. It's perfect for that. Now when you sand the edges of the floor, just be very careful that you don't take off too much, otherwise you'll have a slight wobble in the coach when you look along its length. So you don't want any wobble on it. This edge is slightly angled as well, to coincide with the tumble home of the coach. So just be careful that you don't sand it horizontal. So try and keep the angle that's on there. So the outer skin of the carriage with all the detail on is quite delicate, so you've got to be careful not to damage it. You can easily snap it along the joins here, but don't worry if you do, because when you glue these on, these are just fascia panels, and the main strength is in the inner partition. Now because these are moulded by hand, sometimes there can be a slight variation in length between the two panels, which is not ideal at all. But you can easily fix this to a degree by just scoring along like you're cutting a piece of plastic card and carefully snapping them, and then you can just score another line and take a little bit off. So that's what I've done here, just so that that matches up a bit better, and here as well. So that's an easy, quick fix to that problem if you have that problem. So the next part is to mark where the partitions are going to go. Now this outer skin is for the brake second open, and I'll show you where to put the partitions. So the first one goes about here. So measure that, so it's that distance there is half of that distance there. Okay, the next partition goes in between here, and then there's obviously ones at the very ends as well. The skins can vary in length between each other by a millimetre or so. So the most crucial one that you want to get lined up is this one here, because you've not got much room, not got much leeway there for adjustment. So before you fit the partitions, you need to make sure that they're all the same height. What can sometimes happen is the partitions can be slightly too tall. So the height should be 109.5 millimeters. So this panel is 100 and if you have a look there, you can see that it's nearly 1.5 millimeters too tall. So what to do is just mark the bottom, draw a line and sand off 1.5 mil. So just make sure that all the partitions are the right length. It tends to be the solid panels at the worst. Due to it being quite a large area, the resin can expand when it's because it gets quite hot. Whereas this piece, because there's a hole in the middle, it doesn't tend to expand the same. There's not really much I can do about that at the moment, because I haven't really got a temperature controlled environment. So you see this one is okay. These blank ones go at the ends of the coach and try and get the shiny side to the outside. That's because at a later date we'll be gluing this piece on here, so that'll glue on there like that, but we can't glue that on until we've nearly finished the coach. That's one of the last parts to get glued on. Make sure that you clean out the slots at the back. Make sure there's no flashing, because you want those to slot in perfectly. You don't want any gap. You don't want this sticking out like that, because if that sticks out slightly, then when you put the coach side on, you're going to have a problem. So you want the bars to be nice and flush with the side here. Right, you see there's a slight lip sticking out? That's to take up the thickness of the side. So make sure that this bar is flush with this piece here. So before you glue your partitions on to the underframe, slot the aluminium bars into place. This way you can check that all of the partitions are the correct height. If there's one partition that's slightly higher than the other, even by a 1/4 millimeter, you'll notice that the bar, when you look down the end, it sort of bows a little bit. So once you've got them all sanded, so they're all nice and flat, the bars will be nice and straight. So make sure you do that before you glue them on, because otherwise you'll have to snap them off and try and adjust that, or cut a bit off the bottom. So it's best to do that before you glue the partitions on. And then when you glue the partitions on, you can either leave the top bars in place. They're actually quite a tight fit. Like that, so you can leave them while the glue is drying. That way you won't need so many supports to hold all the pieces upright. So before you glue the bars on the bottom, make sure that this bit here is flush. The partitions are very slightly too wide, by about 1/2 millimeter, so just gently sand from there to there, just so that's nice and flush. You can kind of see it there. Otherwise, when you put your bar on, it will it'll be at the wrong angle. It'll stick out too much. It'll be like that too much. So the next step is to put in the aluminium bars. So I've cut these ones to length. And what you want is it to be flush with the ends. You don't want it sticking out like that, otherwise you're going to have to sand it off. Now you won't actually see the ends of these bars when the coach is complete, because you'll have you'll have this panel which will go on and cover all that up. Now, because the bars are aluminium, they have a layer of oxide on them that you want to get off. So you can sand them by hand, but you need to thoroughly sand them so that all that shininess is gone and it's all really rough. That'll also give you more surface area for gluing. So 2 of the bars go in the bottom, and so you want to sand the flat surface there, the large, that bit. You need to do both sides as well. And then the other 2 bars, you only need to sand the edge and just one of the edges on each one. I actually have this little tool which is really good. This one here. This it's called a power file. It looks like a cross between a mini chainsaw and a belt sander, and it's absolutely fantastic for sanding this kind of thing. But of course, if you don't have one of these, you can just use sandpaper. Work fine. Okay, so if we take the 2 bars that you've sanded, the flat side, the biggest sides on, and then we glue them on like that. So I put lots of weights and things on here, and that's to keep it nice and flat on there, because you don't want it to rise up slightly or be slightly tipped over. Otherwise the bars will be glued on a bit skew with. If the bars are glued on squid even slightly, it will affect the oh, pardon me. It will affect the rest of the coat, because if the bar is glued slightly too high up, like that, when you go to put the black panel on here, the internal panel, it will be too high, and then you'll have to try and get these off somehow and re-glue them. So make sure that's nice and flush with the former, and then glue those pieces on. Okay, so there we go. We've got the bars fitted now, and we've not quite. It's quite a rigid structure now. Have a look here. It's quite nice, solid. So the next stage is fitting these panels here. So basically they just glue on like that. But what you're best to do is put a piece of plastic card at the bottom, because there's nothing to support it here. So if you cut a strip of plastic card, this one's about 1 millimeter thick by 11 meters wide, 11 millimeters wide. You don't want it any taller than 11 millimeters, because this is the seat base here, and you don't want the strip to come up any higher than the height of the base. Otherwise, when you glue the seat in, so the seats have got an angle. So this side is to the aisle, and this side is to the window, and that will need to go on top of the white strip so that it's flush with the side of the carriage. So you don't want this strip to stick up above the height of the chair pieces. Otherwise your chair is going to be glued on at a slight angle. It's going to be like that. So what you need to do is glue that on all the way along. Now once it's set, then you can then put on these side pieces. Okay, so we're ready to glue our first sides on. So we've got the plastic now, and we've got this lip, so it'll give us some support. So what we have to do is just glue that right on. on there like that. Make sure it's tight against there. And one thing you have to watch out for is that your bar is actually straight, because it's quite tight in here. If you're not careful, the glue can bow the bar down or up. So just check with your eye that it's reasonably level. You can always put a piece of wood in to hold it level. If it's bowed up the way, you might have to just sort of hold it in position while the glue sets. So now we have the inner sides stuck on. What you want to do now is you want to give this a sand. Carefully sand that, just so if there's any undulation, any slight undulation like there's a little bit, just sand it off so it's nice and smooth all the way along. And the same at the top. When you do the top one, try and use as long a piece of wood as possible with your sanding block so that you get this top bit nice and smooth. What you're trying to do is take out any kind of slight wiggle when you look along the length, the end of the coach there. And that will really help when you stick the outer skin on, for there not to be too much wobble when you look down the length of the coach. So to glue the sides on, I use Bostik, because it's slightly flexible. So you know, if someone tries to bend the coach, it's less likely to crack and come off. So now we're going to look at the outer skin. Now this piece here needs cleaned up. So you've got a bit of flashing around the window. It's quite thin. You can break it out carefully. On some of the coaches, what I've done is I've just used a small file, just filed that around and around there. But what I did this time on these pieces here is I sanded the back. If you see here, what I've done is I've just sanded all that off. So sanded like a really thin layer all the way off, using the power file. I just gently went along, sanded it all the way along. I did try using the belt sander, but it was a bit overkill. So you could do it with the sandpaper as well, but it'll take you a while. But it's probably best to use the sandpaper. A bit more accurate, less likely to ruin the thing. Because you know these bits here are quite delicate until the glazing is stuck in. So you can see here, this is where the glazing will go, and the glazing is 2mm as well. So the glazing is actually really rigid, and it's a two-part. So you want to basically have the join line in the middle there, and it makes it really rigid, so that if someone accidentally picks the coach up by the glazing, because of the thickness of the glazing itself, and that being glued to it, that's not wobbly like that at all. So we should now have a completed body, and the last thing you need to do is glue on the end panels. Once the glue is dried, you can sand the edges. You might need to put a little bit of filler in there. I use chemical metal, which is a type of car body filler, which is I think it's in a polyester based resin. And this is now the end of part 1. Part 2, we will look at doing the roof.